On today's episode, we're recapping the final season of the original Dallas series, and we're kind of sad about it.
I can't believe we're on the last season of Dallas.
We've been watching this for so long.
A long time. The first time I watched Dallas, I watched it in like 2.5 years. But that was when I had to get the mailed DVDs from the Netflix to me.
Yeah.
So I can imagine it was streaming back then, it wouldn't have taken me that long. But we've done this over. I'll have to go back and look. Like, has it taken us like 3 years?
It's been since 2019, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it's been a
4
little
years,
bit. Or 2018. I don't know.
One of those.
I don't know.
Crazy. But it's 14 seasons long. So like that's
an
we're also
accomplishment.
watching other stuff. So I mean, come on.
Exactly.
We kind of have to have a life too.
Yeah, and my boss said something about, like, what I was doing. I was working at home and whatever. She asked me a question. I was like, I don't know. I was watching Dallas. And she was like, you were watching Dallas? I was like, it's the last season. And she's like,
This is not 1990.
Pretty sure the last season was a while ago. I was like,
She's
whatever.
like, wait a second. That doesn't make any sense.
We're
We're like people on a crime show. They're like, hold on. This person said they were watching the last season of Dallas. That happened 30 years ago.
Something didn't add up. She said she was watching Dallas. That had to be a lie.
That's been determined to be a lie.
Also, when you Google Dallas, it doesn't come up with the TV show, and that's wrong.
I know. You have to put in TV series.
Exactly. That's so rude.
Crazy.
So I'm going to call this season the I Dream of Jeannie season. And we're going to find out why.
Right. I love it. I am super sad there was like no Barbara Bel Gettys in this season.
At all.
Miss Ellie's talked about a few times, and we do see Clayton makes an appearance, but they're off traveling because Miss Ellie just can't handle it. So they're staying away.
They go to like Europe or whatever.
It is just everything. She
everything.
just can't handle the drama of South Fork. So
and Clayton really just comes back every now and then to give us updates on Miss Ellie.
And to kind of start a new plot line too. Like to make something, because a couple times he does, we'll get to that, but like, yeah, he's always like, he just runs in, no, Mama didn't come with me. Like, because they're always like, is Mama with you? No.
Well, you could have called Clayton.
Yeah, exactly. Why didn't you just call this in? You traveled all the way back from Europe, but I guess when you're
distance.
A cajillionaire, you can do that.
Yeah, he's just like, I'm just going to pop over to Dallas for a sec. So the new intro this season is all flashy, and Michelle, April's sister, is one of the first in the credits, even though JR sent her away last season. So what's that all about?
I know. I was like, I didn't even notice. Sometimes I don't watch the credits. At the beginning of the season, when I have to watch it for the first time, I'm like, okay, I gotta catch myself up on the theme song and get myself in the mood. But I kind of don't pay attention sometimes to the credits.
I gotta see who's gonna be there.
That's true.
You know?
That's true. I'm afraid it's gonna ruin it sometimes.
So we start out the season, JR is still in the asylum, and he's not doing well.
No, he's like in solitary.
Yeah.
Because if we remember from last year, he got himself basically like, get into the sanitarium so he could get, what's her name's, Jessica, was it? Her voting rights with West Star, and had a note sent to Sly to like get him out after so long. So, of course, James, his son, found this letter, basically drugged Sly, got it away from her. He ends up leaving him in there at the end of last season. And
that was great.
It was literally like, no one else knows he's there. And James was like, yup, see ya, Daddy. And because they're all, angry at each other. So there's JR just stuck there. And he's like, doo-doo-doo.
And April and Bobby are in France.
Yeah.
Because they're on their honeymoon.
Yep.
And they run into
Susan Lucci,
who they become friends with.
Yes.
Because her husband died and he was an oil guy. And then April's missing. And I was like, duh. Susan Lucci.
Yeah. Remember that lady that ran into you at the airport, then needed a ride to the same hotel you're staying
Come
at?
on.
By the way, her name is Sheila. Yeah, she just all of a sudden is everywhere. Then you guys go to coffee with her and she's crying around about her oil man husband dying and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, interesting. And then next thing we know, April is missing.
You see Susan Lucci, you in trouble, girl.
Yep.
That's all there is to it.
I was like, she's an important guest star. Susan Lucci is world famous for being Erica Kane on All My Children.
She's also super tiny.
She is super tiny. I remember back in the day when I was even more entrenched with soap operas than I am to this day. I used to get like the magazines, the soap opera magazines. And like, you know, when you watch a show, you can't always tell how small people are because even the guys are short sometimes.
Yeah.
So then it's like definitely weirdly relative. She's tiny.
She's so small.
She's tiny next to these other people who really aren't that tall or big. And you're like, oh my gosh, she is itty bitty.
She's so pretty. So pretty.
I love her.
So her people kidnapped April. And then Bobby has to pretend like Susan Lucci is April.
Yeah. Because she wants to make a speech at OPEC. And she needs to get her point across. And she's got to pretend to be the wife of an oil man. So in order to do that, she's got to be April. Which makes no sense. And I mean, I'm like, first of all, we've noticed how everyone knows who the Ewings are. Right. You're telling me there was no pictures in worldwide papers of their wedding when Bobby Ewing got married?
People magazine.
Exactly.
What are they? Oh, April Ewing pumping gas in People magazine.
Exactly.
So
guys.
Susan Lucci's all like, Bobby, you have to make out with me in public so this looks real. And I was thinking, did Natalie use our time machine and quantum leap into Susan Lucci's body and do this whole plot in this show? Because I was like, this is weirdly suspicious.
You're like, wait a second.
Yeah,
somebody else wants to be married to Bobby.
Oh, Bobby, we must be married. Like, we have to make it look married. So let's make out a little bit. And then he's like, okay, Natalie. Susan Lucci.
Susan Lucci, Sheila, whatever your name is. And the worst part is, like, right when they get there, they see Jordan Lee, who has over the years made fewer appearances. Well, he's retired. We find that out. So he's Jordan Lee, for all of you who've been following along, is an oil guy. He's there too. And he's all like, oh, chummy, chummy, chummy. But then when they go to some function, Jordan is like, oh, hello, April.
Yep.
And Bobby's face is all, what?
Yep.
And he's
Bobby
mad.
was like, oh, it's him. Hey, Jordan. Who's this lady?
Yeah.
He's like, that's April. That's your wife.
Yeah. And it's like all crazy. So he's in on it. And Bobby, of course, confronts him like a little bit later on. And he's like, whatever. Like, they have a private conversation. It doesn't end well for Jordan because he gets taken out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
like, she's dealing with some crazy people.
My favorite part is the part where Susan Lucci's like, we should sleep together to pass the time.
Right.
Because we're in this hotel room.
Right.
And Bobby says, yeah, if it'll bring my wife back sooner. Okay.
My favorite is he's straight up like, if you're that desperate and you're so sad and pathetic that this'll help and it'll get my wife back, then yes, I'll sleep with you.
But then he tells her she's not pretty.
Yeah.
Which is a lie.
And exactly. And she's all, I'm not. She like wants to hit him and everything. So then what's that called? Reverse psychology. Her.
Sorry, Nat. That's how it goes. Quantum leap.
Yeah. True story. I know. I'm like, dang it.
It didn't work.
Dang it. I could have had Bobby.
And she tells Bobby, I have only one real intention. To change the course of history. And this was the line that cemented my theory about Quantum Leap and Natalie being in Susan Lucci's body.
Truth.
So we go back to James, who loses all his money and his club in a card game. But he has enough to get a giant shoulder tattoo.
Yeah, James says, like, how he got into this poker game because he's JR's son, and then these old timers took advantage of him, and he lost all this money because he doesn't know how to bluff. And it was just, it was crazy. And he lost, like, the club that he was getting for, like, Michelle to run, and he just messed everything up.
And then whatever is going on with Cliff and this lady, I can't follow.
In the beginning, I said Carter McKay and Cliff are boring and weird, and Liz Adams and Johnny Dancer come into the picture. And in the beginning, it was boring and weird, and I was like, okay, so part of my notes at that point, nothing had happened with them.
No.
And I was like, and at this point too, so JR they end up putting him on drugs in the sanitarium because they're like, they're like, he's hallucinating because he's like, my wife and my son are conspiring to keep me in here. And the doctor's
Well, that
like,
sounds crazy.
that's not true. And luckily somehow he did get a phone call to Sly, who convinces Callie, that she needs to go and get JR out.
Yeah, he gets out at the end of episode 3, and I swear to God, this is the end of the Wizard of Oz. He has a box of gifts for all his friends. He's made friends in the asylum.
Yeah.
And then the last guy is all like, I don't suppose there's anything in that box for me.
It totally
It
does.
is the Wizard of Oz. And he says, what I've got for you doesn't come in a box. It's been inside you all along, Dorothy. I was like, what am I watching right now?
My favorite part about this is that I forgot this. So all of these guys who are in the sanitarium all have helped JR because the one crazy guy is going to beat up JR. JR finds out that there's cameras and then they'll have it all taped. And then he gets these other guys to help him. And they do the hijinks. They trip him and then they figure, they do all this. So of course they helped him. So when he gets out, he does all these gifts for them. So the guy who, of course, it's been in you all along. He's like, you know, if you get out of here, you have a job with me. And you see a side of JR that's
that's loyalty.
It is. And it's when he got in there, he's like, I don't want to have anything to do with these guys. Please don't touch me. And then they helped him and he realized, okay, these guys are normal guys. They just either have, mental health issues or whatever. So that was interesting. And of course he gets out, he tells off all the people at the hospital. And he's mad that he was in there this whole time.
I want to point out a line that happened with Cliff's weird new girlfriend, who we are supposed to know, but we don't.
No.
She meets with some guy who she was previously working with or whatever, and she's all, I'm not going back to New York. And I swear, this guy, I had to rewind it. I swear he says, Tony Danza's on his way here. And I'm all like, oh, this is interesting.
You're like, what?
But wait, no.
Oh,
It's
Johnny
Dancer.
Dancer.
Johnny Dancer. It's not Tony Danza. Wah,
dang.
wah, wah.
Hold me close now, Johnny Dancer. That'll be our new one.
JR gets out and he fires Sly.
He fires Sly straight up. He's like, you allowed yourself to get tricked by James. You can write yourself a recommendation letter because you're fired.
Yep.
JR.
Then
she's all like, what?
I know. And she's done everything for him.
She has been, and I'm kind of like, at this rate, we kind of find this out because then she gets fired and she's like, I got all this stuff. Because I'm like, JR, she's done some stuff for you. She knows done
everything.
Some stuff.
He also gets James fired at the construction site. And then he looks at a photo of John Ross and he's all, aw, that's my good son.
Oh, that's right. My son. I better call him.
Right?
So at the end of last season, John Ross and Christopher both were going to go stay in London with Sue Ellen. So that Bobby and April took them when they went on their honeymoon. So, of course, the boys are in London. And JR calls to talk to John Ross. And he asks if he can speak with Mrs. Ewing. And they're like, there's no Mrs. Ewing here. And at first, for a second, I was all, oh, what? And then they're like, oh, her name now is whatever it is.
Lockwood.
Lockwood, that's right. And he's like, oh, well, she did it. Good for that. JR loves Sue Ellen.
Yeah.
No matter what. He was literally like, I can't believe she got married to that guy. Well, good for her. And he's like, I love her. In his own way, as crazy as their relationship was for all those years, he loves her. But you know what's crazy about this whole thing? So that's all happening, and let's zoom back to Paris. So they finally come to this meeting point where, at one point, Bobby almost rescued April.
Yes.
He finds this apartment. He had a kid on a bike who is trying to get a donation from him, follow a car. He ends up finding where April is. Well, of course, they can't beat down the guards, and then everything happens, and she gets re-kidnapped. And so then the meeting comes about, and his stipulation is April needs to be there with, she can go as Jordan's date, which, of course, Bobby didn't know at this point that Jordan had been shot and killed. So they get there and it's like the OPEC or whatever it's called. And they're all out there on the terrace. And Susan Lucci / Sheila, of course, has been lying this whole time. And she's just crazy. And she ends up going into a building and gets a gun out of a seat cushion. And then comes back out. And then when these guys are speaking, she pulls a gun. And Bobby grabs up her arm. And she ends up shooting in the air. But at this point...
Everyone's
all
scrambling
the armed
around.
Guards and everyone now pulls their guns.
Yeah, the armed guards are like military.
Yeah, including the two guys that are on either side of April, who is now there. Mm-hmm. And because of this, they pull out guns, but then the other armed people all have guns, and Bobby's face says it all. Like, he knows now those other guys have guns, they're going to get shot at, and my wife is right between them. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happens.
And she gets shot. I don't know if I texted you at this point. I don't know if I did. But I was like, I am done with this show.
You
I'm done. If
You
she
told
dies,
me
I'm done. I'm not watching
you were like,
anymore.
April just got shot and I'm not okay. And I wasn't there yet and I had forgotten she got shot. So I was
I'm
like,
sorry.
oh.
That's right, because you were like, oh, I should start watching
I
the
was
show.
like, oh, I can start watching Dallas.
They forced us to be best friends with April.
They did. Because in the beginning, you were kind of... Exactly. We didn't like her. And
she I'm like, weird. She's cool. We're best friends. She's awesome.
And then you grew... she grew on all of us. And you're like, oh, man. And the thing that I hate the most about this episode, when April is like falling down all dramatically and then Bobby's running to her side, they're playing some kind of weird romantic sexy music while she's dying and while Bobby's running over her.
My romantic sexy wife is dead.
It was very strange. So I was like, okay, that's weird to me. And the next thing that's weird is that somehow all of this episode is like still none of the Ewings were told about April. And I get Bobby is like,
about her
just
dying,
beside himself.
Yeah.
So
I know he's walking around France.
Yeah, he started walking around France. He sees her everywhere, of course. But no one's told. And somebody calls JR and is like, oh, hey, do you want to make a comment about what happened? Mm-hmm. And he goes, oh, something with the oil, whatever. And she's like, yeah, but what about your sister-in-law? What about my sister-in-law? And that's how he finds out from a reporter.
This is also how I find out. Because they don't tell us at the end of this episode that she's dead. So that's why I texted you and I was like, if she dies, I'm done. They make us wait 10 and a half minutes into the episode to find out she is deceased.
Yeah.
And like you said, JR finds out from a reporter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so mad.
That's true.
I was like, well, they wouldn't kill her.
I know. I was unsure too. I was like, I don't think she dies.
But she is in the rest of the season. But it's just Bobby hallucinating.
Yeah.
And remembering.
It's interesting because, you're talking about the credits like we were earlier. Like, you see her at the beginning in the credits and she stays in the credits.
Yeah.
And she becomes, she's
and also Michelle being in the credits is because she comes back.
Yeah.
And she's like...
And you're like, oh, man.
I'm doing my own thing.
Exactly.
So this French dude finds Bobby wandering around the shops. And he tells him the whole plot. Mm-hmm. And Bobby's all, I know. And I'm like, cool it, Bobby. He's just recapping it for us.
Yeah.
So we know what's happening. Just calm down.
You know that's your cue. You're not supposed to freak out.
And Cliff reads about April.
Yeah.
Because they're best friends.
They were besties. That was the other thing you forget about certain things all of a sudden. Then you're like, oh, Cliff.
And then James comes in and he's like, we should get JR because this is probably his fault or something. And then Cliff is like, James, revenge isn't worth it. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, Cliff has grown.
Yeah, everybody kind of softened when this happened because they're
for
like,
because
James was even like, oh, I should make amends kind of with my dad because, but JR was having none of it to begin with because he's like, no, you left me in a sanitarium and you're no longer my son. And
I have in my notes here at this point, just poor Christopher. I don't know if it's because he's like, oh, another one of my moms is gone.
Exactly. And he actually has a conversation when they get back to South Fork with Bobby, why didn't you tell me? I would have wanted to be with you.
Right.
And how, as an adult, Bobby couldn't even handle what was going on. He kept dreaming that April was still there and whatever.
And
so it's
seeing her everywhere. Every blonde woman is April.
Exactly. And poor little Christopher. Exactly.
Poor Christopher.
He's so sad.
That kid is going to need some serious therapy.
But then we get back to, of course, a lot of the hijinks with everyone else. And then JR hires Sly back because And he wants to start his own, he's starting his own little like JR Enterprises or something. And he realizes, oh, I need somebody like her because she's the only person I can count on.
And she's all sure.
She's like, well, of course, JR. And I have to tell you something. By the way, when you fired me, I was mad. And I tried to give James all this info on you. But no one took it. So we're fine.
So it's all good.
It's so bizarre.
I forgot what I was going to say.
And we can talk about Johnny Dancer.
Oh, yeah. Cliff gets in a fight in the restaurant with Johnny Dancer, whose name is actually Johnny Danzig. But they call him Johnny Dancer because they think that sounds cooler than Danzig.
I know. I was so confused about his name for the longest time. And I'm like, okay. Because, I have it as in the notes as Johnny Dancer and then Danziger. And I'm like, I don't even remember what his name was. So.
But everybody in this show has been in a fight in that bar. Or like in a bar or a restaurant, but nobody has been in bad shape like Cliff is after this fight. He's like the only person that's ever been black and blue after a fight.
Yes.
And he has a neck brace.
Yeah. And all of these people like threaten this Danziger guy, and him and Liz had a weird relationship. Like they were romantically involved. And then he comes back and Carter's involved, Carter McKay's involved, and everything is so weird about it.
So
but
weird.
It's kind of like, I was even like not really paying attention to what the past was. I'm like, okay, this is very strange. Because then the next thing we know, Johnny Dancer is dead.
Yeah, he's shot in his room.
Shot in his room. And all of these people could be suspects because everyone hated him. Just like every, episode of any kind of drama ever, that there's several people that could be responsible.
Yeah. And I felt like, though, that this season was at a faster pace than the other seasons.
Yeah.
And which is why I got through it faster. Like, because there was always something going on because they're trying to wrap stuff up. But I also felt like the Carlisle and the Johnny Dancer stuff was just like so extra, and I didn't need any of it.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm like, don't stray from the main characters all the time. It's kind of crazy.
And Miss Ellie's been out of the picture, like we said. Clayton asked JR if he has a message for his mama. And JR says, yeah, tell her I wish she'd stayed single. Then they get in a fight, but Bobby breaks it up and he tells JR that he's selling Ewing oil. And it's a whole thing. And also James' mom, Vanessa, comes back.
Yeah, Vanessa comes back. And when Bobby gets back, he's just over. I mean, Bobby's so sad. So he wants to sell Ewing oil. He's over it. But then he's bound and determined to figure out and find Sheila Foley, and he's going to do that. But that's also when Vanessa comes back, and now JR's like, you're the love of my life, and I'm never letting you go again. So that's super fun. And then Bobby's on his course to go find the real Sheila Foley, which of course is a fake name. Because then
we find out it's whom.
Yeah. The real Sheila Foley is in a wheelchair, and it just happens to be the lady from Dirty Dancing.
Yes, Vivian Pressman, played by Miranda Garrison.
Yes.
She's the real Sheila.
Because there's some episode years ago on Dallas where I swear she's also in it, but when we looked this up the last time, it said Dallas 1990, which would be this episode.
Okay, but it was really hard to find her credited for this role anyway. Because I looked on her IMDb and there was no Dallas on there or wherever I was looking. And I was like, wait a minute. So I had to look in like 3 different places to figure out that, yes, it's her. I recognized her immediately.
Yep, I was like, that's her.
I recognized her from her coming out of the cabin with no makeup on.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly how we know her. That's how she looks normally. So she's the fake. She's the real Sheila Foley. So clearly the name given was a fake.
And she's a little bit catatonic and she doesn't know what's going on.
Yes.
So then Barbara Eden comes in.
Yes. Senora de la Vega, who wants to buy Ewing oil.
She's from Venezuela, although she's not Venezuelan.
No.
But she married a Venezuelan man.
Yes.
And let me tell you, I'm embarrassed that it took me a whole half an episode to go, wait a minute. They were on I Dream of Jeannie together. That's what's going. That's why I feel weird.
I knew, right? Like, she shows up and I'm like, oh, that's right. Barbara Eden's on this
so
season.
funny.
That's awesome. They're so cute.
We haven't even talked about Callie.
Oh, true. That's true.
Because she's done with JR, and then they get a divorce, and she doesn't want any alimony.
When she went to the sanitarium to be like, I'll let you out, but you need to sign this. We're divorcing, and you'll leave me alone forever.
And she's pregnant.
And he agrees, and they kind of have he's all like, you deserve better, so go on with your bad self. And she doesn't tell him. He has no idea that she's pregnant. So she does kind of take off at that point. Or she lets him out at that point, and she's still in Dallas because even her and Vanessa have like a little lunch together kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Vanessa's asking questions, and she somehow lets it slip that she's pregnant. And she's like, oh, for the love of God, don't tell him. And Vanessa's like, I won't, but... And they even, because at this rate, they're engaged, I think. JR and Vanessa are actually engaged. And, yeah, it becomes crazier and crazier.
But, like, get some alimony. Alimony would not hurt JR in any way.
Callie just doesn't want him to know where she is, what she's doing. I mean, but at this point, she was still in Dallas, so it's very interesting. And the funny part is Leanne de la Vega, played by Barbara Eden, comes in as, a Ewing oil buyer. And I think at this rate, it was when, Michelle shows back up in town. And basically, I think she tries to smack Bobby, and she's mad because he buried April in Paris. And he had gotten permission to bury from their mom. But now Michelle's mad, and now she wants to, take revenge on Bobby, too. Which makes no sense. She's kind of off her rocker, but we find out later she had met Leanne in a resort in Miami that she was working at.
Yes.
And they found out they have a common enemy in JR, because we heard that Leanne had a history with JR, and he sure doesn't recognize her when they meet each other.
How does he not recognize her? She's freaking Barbara Eden. They had slept together when she was real young, and then she'd gotten pregnant, and she'd had it terminated.
And he basically was like, "You're trash, get away from me."
Yes.
And
he doesn't know about all that.
Exactly.
And so she wants to destroy him, so she buys...
And if this doesn't tell you how many people JR's been with, then I don't know what would.
Right? He doesn't even know.
He don't remember her at all.
So she buys Ewing oil. She buys Michelle's shares for, super cheap.
Well, no, this is when Bobby sells all
them
of
to him.
Leanne.
That's right. She buys them, and then she sells them to Michelle super cheap, which is awesome.
And the worst part about this is, I think it's at the engagement party that JR and Vanessa have. And I don't know, James is just so bizarre throughout parts of this. He brings Callie to the party.
Yeah.
And then he's so mad at JR still that he announces that Callie is pregnant.
Yeah.
And then there's all this hullabaloo, and then she takes off in a car, and JR chases her down, and she's like, "It's James's baby,"
even though she's never been with James.
Right. But JR doesn't know that, of course. So he believes it, and James kind of doesn't deny it in the beginning. He's just like, "Oh, she told you that? Well," and then he just blows past it. He's just like, "Okay, da 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 da," because they kind of start to talking. James and JR do as the season goes on too.
So when Barbara Eden sells the company to Michelle goes into the Ewing offices, fires Phyllis, fires Sly.
Yeah.
She's like, you guys are out.
And
You're
basically
gone.
fires JR because Leanne hired JR on as a part-time.
Right? It was awesome.
Well, and I think right before that, so Leanne tried to get Vanessa to walk in on her and JR in a hotel. And because she's like, "Oh, I'm going to take everything from him." Well, Vanessa walked up to the room with this room key, but she never goes in. But she's also just come to the realization, if I'm constantly worried that he's being unfaithful, I better just move on, which she does.
Yep.
And then that's when Leanne hires JR, but then this all happens. Vanessa leaves him. So now she's like, "Oh, hey, guess what? I sold this to Michelle. She's your new boss." And JR's just like, "Oh my God." And now she fires everybody.
Which was kind of an awesome scene.
Yeah.
And then JR goes to Sly's apartment, and they're sitting on the couch, and she's touching his ear. And I was watching this. I was working at home.
Were you like, "Oh my God, that's your dad"?
I was screaming at the TV. I again was like, if they start making out, I'm done. Mid-season, I'm done.
Yeah.
Because remember how she was his friend's daughter who was graduating high school, so he hired her and whatever, and that's how we started this whole thing. And then they do it. I was so mad.
Thank God it's "Oh, I'll help you relax," and then they just turn off the lights. So you're like, "Oh my God."
Yeah,
and then
don't
the
make me
next
see this.
morning
Don't make me
he's
see
trying
this.
to leave. And she comes out and they're both they don't know what to say. She doesn't know what to say. And he's like, "Hey," he's basically "Thanks for last night, but we never have to talk about this again," or whatever.
Right?
And he leaves and she's like, "Oh, phew." Like, she was worried
Like-
that he was weird,
Yeah.
which I'm like, he's JR. You
Yeah.
should have known he
I
wouldn't
don't
be
know where
weird.
that.
But she was like, oh, thank God that was just a one-night thing. And I'm like, okay, that was weird and
Well-
very, very strange.
Spy's kind of a badass, though.
She is
She's kind of like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do.
Yeah. She is pretty cool. Like, she's kind of been that person. She's like that one secretary that we all have wanted to be the whole time. Because, like, their secretary jobs anyway seem like the best jobs ever.
Especially that front secretary who's
Oh,
just
Kendall.
like, oh, you're here to see who?
Kendall's the pre-secretary,
Yeah.
as we've discussed. Kendall's the secretary's secretary.
Right.
So she's out front by the elevators, and then you're here to see which secretary. Oh, let me get Phyllis or Sly or Jackie, and then they get past them to get to see JR, Bobby,
And
Cliff,
sometimes
Michelle.
fights ensue.
Yes.
And, like, your job is adventurous.
But
It's
everybody's like, oh, hey, like, they're all, like, get along. Everybody's respectful. And then you ladies can take off for the night, and then they get to go to lunch. And they probably get great Christmas
Yeah.
gifts
Oh,
and, like,
definitely.
bonuses. And, like, what a great job.
I want
So,
this
yeah.
job. How do I get this job?
Exactly.
So now Michelle forces James to marry her, which is dumb.
Yeah.
What kind of marriage is this going to
Yeah,
be, Michelle?
she just, like, because, when they broke up before, and then all of a sudden it's like, she's trying to do this, and it's like, well, we can stick it to JR in the beginning, and it's very strange, but it's like, James then gets half ownership technically, or she's gonna, like, she'll allow him to have it as long as they're still married.
Exactly.
My favorite part about this is that Christopher and John Ross are back at South Fork now, and they think it's hilarious, the shenanigans that go on between James and Michelle. And they talk about it quite a bit, and they're like, oh yeah, it's super funny to watch what's going on. And that's like a precursor. So they say that at one point. But I was like, okay, that's interesting that these boys just see everything and they kind of know what's happening.
There's a clip that I put on our TikTok where Christopher is like, oh, well, this happens later, where we find out James is married to someone else.
That's what I was
Yeah.
just I have that whole thing written out because I'm like, their faces were the best ever. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, these boys, when they said that at the beginning, like, oh, it's really funny to be around the house because these guys are so crazy. It's like, yep, they are.
Because Michelle and James go live at South Fork.
Yeah, then they move him in. Because again, they're trying to get at JR still at this point. So James was trying to make nice because of April, but then JR's still been a little standoffish.
But then JR goes to see him at work. And
Yeah.
he says, you wanted some kind of sitcom father.
Yeah.
Well, he's going to get one in less than a year when Bobby is his dad on
Let's
Step
stop
by
it.
Step.
That's the next thing I'm going to watch.
I was like, are they already filming Step by Step? Did they say this on purpose? That's pretty funny.
That is pretty funny.
Also, when Michelle gets her dinner catered at the apartment with the catering company is called Z Best Catering.
Should I change mine to that?
Yes, Z Best. And then she drugs James, and
Yeah.
I don't know what that's all about.
I'm pretty sure that's maybe when he signed off on his whole life or whatever. So
All right. And when they moved to South Fork, Christopher, who seems to be otherwise alone all the time, he tells JR he thinks Michelle is bitchin'.
yeah.
I rewound that 3 times.
Yeah.
I was like, did he say
Is he
bitchin'?
bitching? And precursor to all this, like, John Ross is like young, obviously, and Christopher's even younger than John Ross. So watching all this, it's like, hey, Uncle JR, Christopher's all like chummy with JR just because he's his
Yeah.
uncle and whatever. And JR is very like, oh, the boys, yay, they play that whole game. And it just cracks me up. And we'll get into this towards the end, talking about whether or not we're going to watch the reboot, just because of what happens as everybody gets older. But I just thought I'd have to point that out real quick. Because, of course, Bobby has some conversations with Christopher. And then somehow Bobby moves to California for a while. Because he's still trying to chase down fake Sheila. And he's fantasizing about April this whole time. But he finds out that she possibly has a daughter that lives in Malibu. So he just goes there and rents a beach house.
Oh, this
once
whole
again,
thing.
to be rich.
Right? And he's like, I'm just a drifter. And her name is Jory, which is
Jory.
somehow short for
Marjorie. By the way, I love the name Jory. Like, I was like, that's so cool, but not, Marjorie. I can see how it's kind of short, but whatever.
What is this?
I do have to point out, though, that he gets there and he meets Jory and then her roommate, Kit, who's played by Sherry Shattuck. Is that how you say it? And I was like, what's this lady in? I need to, like, right away, I was like, oh, she's very familiar. So I look her up. She's not so like popular familiar, but you know what she was on? An episode of Who's the Boss called This Is Your Life, Tony episode. And I was like, oh, that's funny. So I just watched that. So right away I was like, how is this lady? She's totally famous. Oh, nope, that's because I just saw her.
Well, another person who you may have recognized for no reason is when Michelle and James are trying to make each other jealous all the time. He brings home a woman named Dee Dee.
Would that be Eva LaRue?
Eva LaRue, a.k.a. Natalia Boavista on CSI Miami, a.k.a. Dr. Maria Santos Gray on All My Children, back when I used to watch it in the 90s.
That's exactly where I knew her from, was All My Children.
And Michelle throws her into a pool, and then James throws Michelle in, and they're having a good old-fashioned 90s primetime drama girl fight in the pool.
And a good old-fashioned Dallas pool fight.
Yes.
Because everyone fights in the pool.
So now Cliff is the energy czar, and that's his title now.
Well, Cliff disappeared for a while.
Yeah.
After Dancer was found dead. And then all of a sudden he was found getting information on Sheila Foley in some other town. And so Liz was like, thank God, and blah, blah, blah.
And Carlisle...
And Carter
McKay was arrested
has
for
been arrested.
Dancer's death.
Because there was a bug in Carter's office because JR managed, this is a whole long backstory, JR managed to have sleep with his wife and then got her to bug the office so he could find out what was going on. Well, because of that, there's a recording of Carter McKay telling Dancer that he's a dead man.
Yeah.
So he ends up on trial for murder.
And Liz and Cliff end up breaking up. And Liz says to Bobby about Cliff, the higher he climbs, the more insufferable he becomes. And that's true. Except that for a while, Cliff was, like, after April's death, Cliff was, like, chill.
Yeah. And what was that one guy who kept showing... He actually threatened Cliff to break up with Liz. And he ended up in Liz's apartment multiple times. I don't even remember what that guy was all about.
I don't even know.
He's very inconsequential because it just reminded me of that. But I'm like, whatever happened to that guy?
Way too many extra people in here.
I'm like, people we don't need that aren't part of the clan. We don't need them in here. Like, no.
And then a woman shows up claiming to be James' wife. And she brought his son.
Yes, I love Deborah Lynn. She shows up and basically gets a hold of JR, and she's like, I'm married. Because they were on TV. Michelle and James did an interview, so she sees this, and she's like, wait a minute, I'm married to James. She has a baby and is married to James.
And he thought they got an annulment.
Yes.
Because her parents didn't want them to get married. They got married in secret.
Yeah.
She never got an annulment.
And he's like, oh, I'm leaving town. Get that annulment. And she never did because she found out she was pregnant. She shows up. JR tries to hide her because he's like, oh, crap. Because if this marriage isn't legal, then he doesn't have the half of Ewing oil that Michelle says he has. So JR hides her, and keeps trying to say, hey, James is out of town. Well, she figures this out, and she storms in to South Fork. And she's like, James and I are married, and da-da-da-da-da. And that's when I was like, Christopher and John Ross's faces were like, oh, yeah. This is getting good. And I just was dying.
Christopher says, James can't be the daddy of that lady's baby and be married to Michelle at the same time. And John Ross is like, of course he can, butthead. He's a Ewing. They were all smiles when all this is going on. They're like, our lives are awesome. But also this baby is like in the first episode that the baby shows up.
Yeah, he changed actors right between the episodes.
Immediately.
I wrote that down. James's
actors.
baby changed actors between episodes, LOL, is exactly what I wrote.
Oh, that was so fun. And like the new actor was like a year older than the other
Now this baby's like way older.
It was so weird. And the baby's name is Jimmy, of course.
Yes, Jimmy, because he's James Jr. This goes back to, so Bobby is in Malibu, and he has rented this house next to Jory, and he befriends her. So he slowly gets to know Jory. First of all, Bobby Ewing at this rate is like 42. Believe me, with my research, I have figured it out. Jory's like 24. But they're like, she's smitten. And he's just trying to befriend her. Then he slowly asks about her mom because he knows who the mom is. So he's like trying to get all this information. Well, the next thing you know, they're involved in some big-ass drug story. This roommate's boyfriends, guys, like slip these drugs into Jory's purse. They toss the house. Like everything's crazy. I'm like, what is happening in California?
Yeah, this
and
is so
by the
unnecessary.
way, how long really is this? How long is Bobby living in California?
Renting a beach house.
Renting a beach house
By
is
himself.
so expensive, but of course he's a Ewing, so he has the money. And he's, oh, by the way, he's Bobby Southworth because he can't tell her Ewing. He doesn't know what she knows. He does not sure.
She's never seen pictures of the Ewings.
No. So this whole thing goes down. And then she, of course, gets kidnapped because everybody gets kidnapped. And he ends up having to save Jory. And he has to make a decision. So her mom was going to come to town for like her birthday. So he was like, I'd love to take you to the airport just to meet your mom.
Right.
And this all ends up happening, though, when she gets kidnapped. And then all of a sudden he has to make a choice. So he takes the ransom to meet these guys. Jory gets pushed out of the car. She runs to Bobby, hugs him, and then they get in the car, the convertible. The kidnappers get pulled over by the police. Bobby speeds out of there, and the cops are like, wait, Mr. Ewing, wait. She's like, Ewing? What are you talking about? Oh, by the way, those guys ran into a restaurant where the biking kid from Paris called him, like, he didn't. He just said Team Ewing.
Like, oh, hey.
And he never said Bobby Ewing.
Yeah.
He was like, hey, Bobby. And he goes, Team Ewing all the way. And Jory's like, what's he
What does
talking
that
about?
mean?
And he's like, oh, something I donated to. It's totally fine.
But also, let's not forget that the thing here was that Bobby had to choose, does he go to the airport to catch Susan Lucci?
Right.
Or does he
save this girl.
her
who
daughter
he now
Jory?
clearly has developed
He's
feelings
totally
for.
in love with her because she's very young.
Yes. And he chooses Jory because by the time they get to the airport, they've missed Susan Lucci.
Yeah.
And now Jory's confused and they're in the passenger loading zone, so I'm not sure how this goes down. But I guess if you're Bobby Ewing, you can do whatever you want. So she finds out that he needed to see her mom. You just used me. So she jumps out of the car and she starts walking. He jumps out, leaves his car parked there, which is a no-no, and chases her down. And he goes, well, when it came down to it, what decision did I make? You or her? And then he's like, do me a favor. You just ask your mom about Bobby Ewing. And that's how he leaves it. And then he just comes back to Dallas. And we're like, bah, bah, bah.
Also,
like, what just
Susan
happened?
Lucci is her stepmom,
Yes.
but has been with her since she was like a baby.
Yeah, married her dad when she was like really young. So, yeah.
Now, Clayton returns without Miss Ellie again to wrap things up. And Miss Ellie doesn't want to come back to South Fork because Barbara Belgetti's retired in 1990. And so she is giving the entire place to Bobby.
Clayton gives his Westar voting shares to JR. And JR's like, what? I misjudged you, Clayton. Woo, 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 woo.
Whatever.
And then all of a sudden he's like, and by the way, Miss Ellie would like the title and all of South Fork to go to you, Bobby.
Yeah.
And then
JR's
JR
like,
loses his mind.
Where am I supposed to live now? Because
Bobby's like, nothing changes.
JR has no friends,
No.
no wife. His sons aren't talking to him. John Ross has escaped.
At this
to
rate, yeah, he wants
England.
He wants to go back to
He
his
has a
mom's.
plan.
He's okay. So this is what's crazy. When this baby shows up, James's baby shows up. JR's
so
paying
sad.
way too much attention to the baby, and John Ross even overhears JR talking about South Fork, going, "I need a place for my son James and my grandson Jimmy." And John Ross is like,
What about
what
me,
about
Dad?
me? And so he overhears all this. So he wants to go, of course, he's trying to convince Christopher to go with him too. He's like, we can go stay with my mom. And he's just super sad.
And
Yeah,
he's been skipping
just
school
yep,
and getting in trouble.
Getting in trouble, that's
and
right.
he's like, Dad, I want to go visit Mom. But he's already told Christopher that he's not planning on coming back.
Yeah.
And he's like, you can come too.
Yeah. He's super sad. And Jared just doesn't get it. And all this crap is happening. And then and also during this time, he goes and gets a random physical where they tell him he has to stop drinking.
Yeah.
He needs to stop eating pretty much everything good and start working out, which was just such a random thing for them to do.
It's just another nail in his coffin of like, I am so sad. My life is so pathetic.
Yeah.
I'm alone. I don't have anywhere to live. And he goes to find Callie. and she's in Palm Beach, and he's found out that James can't be the father.
Yeah, James finally admits he's not the father, so he tracks down Callie.
So she has a baby carrier, and like she kisses this guy on the lips, and then she gets in his car. She puts the baby in the carrier in the front seat,
Of course.
and she gets in the back seat behind the baby, and she's like, "Okay, let's go."
The crazy part is, like, JR goes down. You know, we all know JR, and this is his kid. And he gets down there, and he's watching. And then this all happens, and he's like, let's go. And then he tells everyone, oh, I didn't find her.
Yeah.
So, again, did the right thing. He saw she was finally happy with someone else, and, hey, guess what? She's going to have a good life, so leave him alone. And this was also when... So, after all of this, Jory ends up coming up to South Fork.
Yeah.
And she's like... I know everything. And then Susan Lucci shows up. She agrees to meet and she wants to have, like, she's going to turn herself in and she wants to have like one last day with her daughter. And now Bobby's like softened because he knows Jory and he's like, well, that's her mom.
Yeah.
And even though she did all this crazy stuff, she's going to turn herself in. And so it's totally fine. And it's that whole thing's interesting. And of course, at that point, it's still just like, okay, they're having their like day of fun. And
everyone is blissfully happy.
Yes. And I have to say this. I sure haven't seen Teresa all season, but Deborah Lynn says that she left Jimmy with Teresa when she goes, I think she ended up at Ewing Oil or something at one point, and they're like, to talk to James. And he's like, where's Jimmy? I left him with Teresa. And I'm like, I haven't seen Teresa all season. I saw Ramon a couple times.
Working really hard.
Like,
taking care of people's babies.
Exactly. She's raising all the kids.
And during all of this time when Jory's there having, like, being with her mom and they're all happy, Michelle buys Ray's ranch from Carter McKay because she wants her and James to live there when he leaves his other wife. But he chooses his other wife.
She was trying to be really understanding the whole time so she could see how awesome she was.
Yes.
And he even said that to her a few times, and she really loves James. But it turned into, like, James was like, I can't, we're going to go, like, basically, he's like, we're going to go back to her small town, too, because I'm over this.
Yeah.
And I have a kid, and I don't want to be the dad JR is. I want to be a good dad. And he tells everybody, they're like, hey, we're leaving. We're going back to live by her parents, and... Peace out.
Michelle's got this house on, like, the land. And then she gets drunk. She tricks Cliff into buying.
No. Cliff kind of tricks her. Cliff has kind of always kind of had a thing for Michelle. And he's just like, because, he was supposed to convince James of all this other stuff. And instead, he was like, oh, maybe you shouldn't leave your baby mama.
Right.
Well, then, so he leaves. And then she comes and gets hammered.
But before she gets hammered... She sells the
in the process,
to him for what
half of it for what she paid
exactly
all of it.
She's like, I'll give you half for like really cheap, but then she's like, haha, that's what I paid for it in the first place.
Exactly.
So she's already making a profit on it. Then she gets drunk.
But then while he's having her sign the papers that says, here, you sold me this, he slips in a marriage certificate.
And they're married.
And she's so drunk, and he basically kind of tells her that the next morning.
He also tries to assault her at that point. Yeah. And I was like, so I guess the old Cliff is back.
Yeah. It was very strange. And she literally was like, what's going on? And then that next morning, she pulls a gun on Cliff because she's like, get away from me. I can't believe you tricked me into marrying you. And then she's so hammered.
She wants to go. She goes to South Fork.
Yeah.
To kill JR.
To kill JR. Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's right. Because
of all of it.
Yeah, and I think she was like blaming him because now, of course, James and all the different things. So she shows up there. First of all, she is wearing Cliff's button-up shirt and socks when she gets in her car and drives all the way to South Fork. And then she gets out of her car and is like stumbling out of this car. And she looks up and she sees Susan Lucci, who she knows is responsible for killing her sister. And she shoots her.
How did she know?
You're right. Well, pictures. I guess she's the only one who sees pictures on the internet. She's apparently the only person who pays attention to that kind of thing.
Oh, so
yeah, that was super funny.
Cliff is told that Michelle was arrested for murder. They're just like, he was arrested for murder. And he goes, JR's really dead? because he knew that she was going over
that's
there
right.
to kill JR. And they're like, no. Somebody else.
Yeah.
It's Susan Lucci, that soap opera lady who never wins any awards.
Yeah. And he's like, what? Oh, weird.
He's like, well, that wasn't what was supposed to happen.
That's strange. That's like the weirdest part of that. So she ends up in jail. And of course, JR's like, hey, I can get you out of here if we can do all this. She basically sells another half of Ewing oil back to JR for what she paid for the entire thing. She ended up getting double her money.
She got so much profit in all these deals.
And the best part about this is she sells 2 halves to JR and Cliff, and they're going to end up being business partners. And she knows it. But she gets out of jail, and she ends up like back at Ray's house, which she's like, oh, I guess this is here. And
I live here now.
We skipped over the whole part about Cliff actually came clean. So Carter McKay got convicted of Johnny Dancer's death. And then he was like, I didn't think that would happen. I just figured he'd get acquitted. So he admits it. We find out it was basically self-defense because Dancer pulled a gun on him. They somehow get the police to do it as like a
mistrial?
Whatever. They got a mistrial because they're like, new evidence has come, but we don't think this guy did it. So mistrial. But
I think they were like, because the judge was like, so you think he did it.
Yeah.
But you want us to declare a mistrial. And they're like,
remember,
pretty much.
Like the cops were basically like agreed on it and there was a whole weird thing. And
yeah.
So him and Liz did all that before she got mad at him. And so Cliff is just, kind of on his own now. Because then he finds out Liz sold her oil company to JR, which he kind of forced her to do to help. Did he know that? I think he knew Cliff killed it. I don't even remember how all that happened.
I don't know.
But then Cliff, of course, gets mad at Liz because now JR owns this. And there's so many mishaps and misunderstandings. This is why relationships go wrong because of sitcoms and dramas that no one knows what's happening. But, and then, of course, JR thinks he's got these West Star shares.
He was supposed to be the chairman of West Star.
Yeah, because he got shares from Clayton or whatever. But who shows up to say, hey, these are my shares, but good old Dusty.
Dusty.
Dusty Farlow shows up. You know what's so funny? At the beginning of the episode, I saw his name come on the credits. I was like, what?
To recap, if you haven't been with us for 14 seasons, Dusty was supposed to marry Sue Ellen way back in the day, but he was having Dusty problems, and so they couldn't have children or whatever, and so then they broke up, and then later he came back and was like, look, I have kids. I'm not Dusty anymore.
So much history with Dusty.
He's Clayton's
son. Yeah.
So, yeah. Although, not really.
Yeah. He's actually Jessica's son. I don't know. That you guys have... You go back to our old episodes. You'll figure it out. So then everything kind of blows up. Like, basically, JR sells his share of Ewing oil.
Yeah, because he's like,
Cliff.
oh, I have West Star.
Yeah.
So he sells it to Cliff. And then McKay's like, no. McKay and Dusty are like, no,
Dusty.
You don't own anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his whole life kind of blows up. And that's when John Ross calls and says, I'm never coming back.
Yeah, I'm never coming back.
You have your other son and whatever, which is crazy because he didn't. And
also, Sly is getting married and moving away.
No, that's right.
And Phyllis quits because she doesn't want to be Sly.
Oh, well, when JR was still there, JR was still at Ewing Oil. And Sly's like, hey, I'm marrying this other oil guy and we're moving away because he's got a better... And he's like, oh, no, tell him he can. She's like, no, JR, I really want to do this. He's like, well, teach Sly everything. And she's like, nope. Phyllis, I've waited a long time to say this. She's like, basically, JR, I would never work for you in a million years. Yes. And she's over it. Love Phyllis.
Because Phyllis works for Bobby.
Yeah.
So she doesn't want Sly's job.
Each of their secretaries were loyal. And it was just like, yep.
And then he's alone.
Yep.
And then we start the final episode.
Well, first of all, he pulls a gun out in the second to last episode.
Does he? Okay.
Pulls a gun out and he's just like in his bed.
Yeah, he's lonely. He's sad.
And you're like,
he has nothing. He doesn't have his company anymore.
Yeah, and this is the second to last episode and that's all he's like, he just has the gun out and you're like, oh my God.
What's going to happen to JR?
And before the last episode begins, we get every season cliffhanger palooza.
Yes.
To start the episode, which was amazing. They took every year's cliffhanger and played it for us.
You know why they did this? Because we were feeling sorry for JR.
We
At
were.
the end of that episode, we were like, man, this poor man has lost everything and everyone's turned on him. And then they were like, oh, but remember? We're like, oh, that's right. He killed Tina Louise.
That's right.
We forgot.
Remember all these things he did, and you watch it, and it was like such a memory extravaganza.
And there's a special credit sequence with actors who came back just for the finale.
Yeah, because then all of a sudden, actors are there
it's like,
going,
yeah, it's like old footage of them,
Yeah.
and they're in the credits, and we're like, I'm sorry, what? Wait, why is...
So then I was like, oh, it's because they just showed old stuff.
That's what I thought.
But no, it turns into J.R. Ewing, this is your life.
And this was
and
a
it's
two-part
a wonderful
episode.
life.
It is a wonderful life. Do you know who plays the angel?
I think I looked it up, but I don't have it written down.
So JR is stumbling around. There's no one at South Fork. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's staff, and they're probably like hiding in the closets. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, what's happening?
I'm not sure what's going
He's
on.
stumbling around South Fork, drunk with a gun, and he's wearing a Bob Cratchit sweater, and he falls asleep by the pool and is visited by the ghost of soap opera's past, played by Joel Grey, father of Jennifer Grey. Joel Grey. He was a like Broadway actor.
Interesting.
He was in
I don't know.
Cabaret.
Oh.
Cabaret. Sorry. Joel Grey. Joel
Okay.
Grey.
Sorry, but we got to come back to the fact that you just said cabaret. But
All right,
anyway,
great.
go move on.
Well, that's it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So he shows he's gonna show JR
Yeah.
what would have happened were he
Here's
never
what the
born.
world would be like without you.
Like Jock dies in 78 and Ellie dies in 80.
Of a broken heart right after. Yeah.
Right.
So Ewing Oil, because JR wasn't the oldest, Gary technically was. So Ewing Oil was turned over to Gary. And it went bankrupt because he wasn't an oil man.
He's a lawyer in LA.
Yeah. So then an insurance company took over the building of Ewing Oil, which of course this little angel guy takes him to. And then, yeah, Gary's a Beverly Hills lawyer. Never met Valine, never had Lucy, you know, to this point. And he's kind of a, hey, playboy kind of lawyer. So, and then, of course, Sue Ellen is an actress, and she plays a famous TV reporter. And at first it seems like she's a TV reporter.
Right.
And he's all like, oh, look at her go.
She's so
she's
smart.
married to Nicholas Pierce, the guy who was
With
thrown
the
off
hair.
the building
The guy
a couple
with the
years
hair.
ago.
Also, I have to point out, she's 50 years old in this episode and looks amazing.
She does look amazing.
But she's a soap opera star, and she just got, like, canceled from her soap opera.
Yeah. Whatever. And it's, like, so interesting. And now there's another brother named Jason.
Yeah.
And he's the youngest brother, and he builds houses, and he does all that kind of stuff. We find out he built basically neighborhoods where South Fork was, which is also horrible.
Do you know what his wife's name is?
Oh, her name, hold on, I have it on here somewhere. What is it? It's I want to say it's like Dee Dee or BB or
It's Bootsy.
Bootsy, that's right.
I was
As soon
like,
as I
what
heard
did
it, I
Bobby
was
just
like,
say? Bootsy. That was amazing.
Oh, that was amazing.
Bobby lives in Vegas.
Bobby's in Vegas. He has 3 kids and he's divorced.
And he's behind on his alimony because he has a gambling problem.
He's a big gambling problem.
And he likes to wear his shirts open.
Oh, he is so game show host. It's
He's
kind of creepy.
great.
And I love how Kristen shows up as a random character that's just so out of the blue,
I know. I was
not
like,
necessary.
Why are we visiting these
No.
people? Kristen is a
You think she's a
undercover
call girl,
cop,
but then you think she's an
Yeah.
undercover cop because she takes a bribe, but then she has a phony badge, and I wrote, who even knows?
She's
Ha, ha, ha.
extorting money from politicians,
Yeah.
basically.
It was very strange.
Cliff is the vice president of the whole United
He's
States.
totally. First of all, they show up and he's like in this house, and it's all like it is the average, American. Like they have a big house. He's got a wife and 2 kids, and we find out that he's the vice president of the United States, and
Yeah.
it's hilarious.
And his daughter is Christine Taylor,
Yes.
a.k.a. Marsha Brady and the Brady Bunch.
and also AKA Bonnie from Friends.
That's true, yes.
I wrote. It's so funny about that part that I wrote that. Oh man, Bonnie Marsha is his daughter, and then I wrote, and I wrote an expletive vice president. He's the.
And then
So, yeah.
Ray never knew he was Jock's son,
Nope.
and his life is just fine. Like he like works for.
He got messed up in the rodeo.
Yeah, JR's like, oh, he has a ranch and everything, but no, he's just like a ranch hand or whatever, and it's fine.
He works for someone else,
Yeah.
and he was even sweeping up at a bar, and he walks really bad because he messed up his back so bad. But he lives in a very simple house with a wife and kids, and one of his kids' name is Jock.
Oh,
I was like, oh, and he's the
didn't
only one
notice
who's
that.
happy.
exactly. Because
And
he's
I
like, I never
just-
had to put up with any of this stuff.
And the worst, so of course, excuse me, Carter McKay runs a casino for Johnny Dancer, which is also weird. But Bobby
weird.
has to come begging to him and gets threatened, and he's always trying to borrow money. So that whole scene is kind of bizarre.
And JR is watching all of this invisible
Yeah.
with the angel John Gray.
Yes.
Joel Gray, sorry. And he's doing like the whole It's a Wonderful Life thing.
And especially they go to see Callie, who is married to some jackrabbit in Haleyville, who is
Yes,
a redneck, and
'cause
he
she never made
hits
it
her, and she has 3 kids.
Did not like this at all.
And it was really bad. It was very like, he just was the epitome, and then she's trying to protect her kids. And she's wearing like rags. She's very like Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah.
And the whole thing that goes down, and finally at the end, he's hit her a couple times, then he goes after her children. And she basically kills him with a shotgun. So like she's going to end up spending her life in prison. So that's why they're like, oh, well, this is what happened to Callie.
Yeah, if you had been alive, JR, then she would have been saved.
Right. It was so
So
crazy.
what Joel Gray is telling us is that it's better that JR
was
was
alive,
around, but better for everyone except Ray.
except for Ray and probably Sue Ellen,
Oh
technically.
yeah, Swellen is doing pretty good.
So yeah, lots of weirdness. And then there's like a whole situation too where Cliff's at some like benefit and the president has a stroke. So he's like the acting president of the
president now.
United States. I mean, it's just, JR's just like, hold on.
Oh my god,
He's really now like, well, if anything was going to turn me back to not killing myself,
Right.
it would be
I
this.
do not want Cliff to be the president.
And I love Bobby has a wife who is like, she's interesting. And she ends up like, he was found at like some married chick's house where he had to escape.
Yes,
and
so
he's
he
married
jumped
to
out
some
the
like
window.
Brooklyn bimbo. But
she's so weird.
She's like an actress though or something. And she leaves him and goes to Japan because she's like got a job and she's like, yeah, you're just worthless. So of course he calls up Bootsy, Jason's wife, so he can borrow some money. And that doesn't really like work out well. She's like, oh, there's this safe, and then he like gambles with his payback to Carter McKay, and it works in his favor, but he ends up giving a lot of the money to his ex-wife for his kids, and everything's very bizarre. So yeah, that whole thing is that's how the This Is Your Life turns out. And then JR kind of wakes up from this whole dream, but the angel devil guy is like,
He's still there.
yeah, and he's basically trying to convince him to kill himself.
He's in the mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're like, oh, he's an angel, but then no, he's like,
Gets into his little red suit and
Yeah.
he's like, hey,
He's like,
well,
do it, just do it.
Just do it. Well, Bobby comes sauntering in because
Into
he
the
had,
house.
I think this was like, didn't he like, he must have taken like jewelry to the airport or something. And then he shows back up at the house because nobody else was home. He walks in, he's like, do, and he's at the bottom of the stairs, and then he hears a gunshot and goes running up the stairs, and he runs to the room and he opens JR's door with a look of shock, and he goes, oh my God. And that's
end.
how it ends.
The end. The end. I was like, wait. So we don't know.
Dallas got us again.
We don't know what happened. Did
Yeah.
JR shoot himself? Did he shoot the mirror? Did he shoot Joel Gray? What did he do?
Yeah.
We don't know. We won't ever know because Dallas is over.
Yep. I mean, there's a couple movies.
I know. But like,
Which
I
you
was
can't
like,
find
seriously?
anywhere.
Seriously?
Right.
Seriously.
Right. I mean, at that point, you were like, hold on. Everyone knew at that point it was over. Everyone knew that was the end. And that's how they ended it. And you're like, what? How could you possibly do
How
that?
dare you? And turns out, I don't know what to do without the Ewings in my life. I'm going to miss the staircase and breakfast by the pool and the drama.
I legit wanted to start it from the very beginning.
Seriously.
As soon as I got done. I was like, oh my God.
What will I compare my life to now?
Yeah.
Like, what? Will I be like, oh, I remember that time? when I was
Remember
a Ewing.
the time when I was a Ewing and I lived at South Fork
And it was
this
just
is what
like
we
this
did?
situation that's happening right now. Oh, you don't? Because, because that was like 40 years ago? Oh.
I do have to say, though, that this brings up a question for us.
Okay.
Is what I should say. I'm just going to say we do get to watch the reboot, right? Because it's just a continuation. The Dallas reboot started in 2012.
You guys tell us what you think. Listener, tell us what you think.
I mean, we watched the Will and Grace reboot.
We
so
did.
I'm just saying.
I've watched all the reboots. But tell us what you think. Because do you want us to watch the reboot? Do you want us to watch... We can't find the movie?
The movies don't seem to be available to us. There is like... Well, there's one that's like a that actually happened like in 86. I still haven't seen that one. But there's like The Fall of the House of Ewing or a bunch of different... There's like 3 different movies. A couple, though, came out after the fact. I do know, though, that there is a little bit of a continuation on when it comes to the reboot in 2012. And I think there was only 3 seasons before it got canceled.
Okay.
It does bring a little bit of... Well, because when they ended it, not so much, but you would be very intrigued as to what they do with the next generation.
Okay, and you've already watched it?
I watched it when it was on TNT, and then they yanked it from us.
Rude. How they
so rudely, and said it's canceled, and I said no.
No. Well,
so, yeah.
Okay. Listener, let us know. You can email us at tvtangents@gmail.com, or you can get a hold of us on the Facebook or the Instagram. Just like send us a message. Tell us what you want. Do you want us to watch it? We'll talk about it. Whatever you want.
You do.
Well, what other feelings do you have about this whole situation?
So many. I already missed them, and I don't even know what to do.
I
I'm
know.
like, oh my gosh, how can I
move on?
I can't. How can I ever move on from the Ewings? This might be one of those that, well, it's like I'd have to make an effort, and I would probably get really sucked into watching it at length if I tried to watch episodes again. I mean, I think everybody knows I am randomly, episodes that we've had that you've all heard us talk about, like MASH is always on like Cozy TV or something that I have. Living Single's on all the time. These are just shows. I'm like, oh, yep, have that on in the background. And of course, Friends. I don't think I even have to mention that. I have Friends on in the background constantly.
Oh my gosh, all last week I was watching Unsolved Mysteries. I was like, I'm not supposed to be watching this.
I know. And I'm like, and it's hard, but I'm like, man, I'm going to miss these guys. I'm not sure how long I'm going to be able to hold out with not, having them around. So,
all right, well,
we're sad.
Well, thanks for sticking with us for 14 seasons. Please join us on Patreon for exclusive content not available to the general public. And you can also get our regular episodes early if you subscribe to Patreon. We've also revamped our feature, This Day in TV History. So if you want to know some historical facts about television, come on over to patreon.com and look us up on the TikTok.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of good stuff there. A lot of Dallas stuff on there, too.
Those are the good ones. Then you can see John Ross and JR and Christopher's faces.
It was great.
When they're like, oh, man, this is good.
This is great.
So fun.
I get a little obsessed. All right. You got anything else to say about that?
I don't got anything else.
Well, let's wrap up Dallas, the TV series.
For good.
Forever.
Oh, man.
Oh, sad clink.
Sad clink. Da, 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 da.